They're the hole in the Arctic ground that took 24 years to dig, and when engineers finally reached the bottom, the temperature was hot enough to melt lead. It wasn't a mine. It wasn't for oil. Soviet scientists dug this hole for one reason only: to see how deep humans could go before the planet itself pushed back. They used drills that could snap like pencils. They pulled up rock older than complex life on Earth, and they found something inside that rock that should not have been there at 22,000 feet down. Rumors later claimed they heard the screams of the damned rising from the shaft. That part is a myth. What actually happened down there is stranger, and by the end of this video you'll understand exactly how deep humans have really gone into our own planet and why nobody has ever gone deeper since. It started in 1970 on the Kola Peninsula in the far north of Russia, above the Arctic Circle. The Soviet Union wasn't digging for oil or minerals. This was purely scientific curiosity, weaponized by Cold War pride. The United States had already tried something similar a decade earlier with Project Mohole, attempting to drill through the ocean floor to reach the Earth's mantle. It failed and was canceled in 1966. The Soviets saw an opening. If America couldn't punch through the crust, the USSR would dig straight down through solid continental rock instead, chasing bragging rights as much as data. Engineers picked a patch of ancient granite in the tundra, over 3 billion years old, some of the oldest exposed rock on the planet, and started turning a drill bit into the ground. Nobody involved expected it would still be running 20 years later. Here's where it gets absurd. Drilling straight down for miles is nothing like drilling a few feet in your garage. Standard drill rods would twist apart under their own weight. So engineers used a turbo drill, spinning only the bit at the very bottom using pressurized drilling fluid, while the pipe above stayed still. By 1989, they reached 12,262 meters, over 40,000 feet, the deepest artificial point on Earth, a record that still stands today. To put that in perspective, Mount Everest is 8,849 meters tall. Drop Everest into this hole, and the peak would still sit more than 2 miles underground. And yet, measured against the distance to the center of the Earth, roughly 6,371 kilometers, that borehole had barely scratched the surface. Less than a fifth of 1% of the way to the core. Humanity's deepest achievement is a pinprick. The plan was to keep going, but the planet had other ideas. Scientists had modeled the temperatures they'd find at these depths, and they were wrong. At 12 kilometers down, they expected around 100 degrees Celsius. Instead, they measured 180 degrees Celsius, roughly 356 Fahrenheit, hot enough to warp equipment and cook their instruments. Worse, the rock itself stopped behaving like rock. Under that heat and crushing pressure, solid granite turned plastic, almost like thick caramel, slowly flowing back into the borehole faster than crews could drill through it. Drill bits kept shearing off and vanishing into the depths, forcing engineers to restart from shallower points again and again. That's why the Kola borehole isn't one straight shaft. It's a spindly cluster of branches shooting off the same starting point, the deepest one, named SG3, finally hitting that record 12,262 meters. Then came the discovery nobody predicted. This deep, in supposedly dry crystalline rock, scientists found water. Not water that had seeped down from the surface. This was water squeezed directly out of the mineral structure of the rock itself. Oxygen and hydrogen atoms forced from crystals under extreme pressure, filling cracks that should have stayed sealed for billions of years. It rewrote assumptions about how deep liquid water can exist inside a planet. Then, in rock dated to nearly 2 billion years old, they found something even stranger: microscopic fossils. Fossilized plankton, single-celled organisms preserved in 24 distinct layers, thriving in an environment scientists assumed was far too hostile for any kind of life. Life had been quietly persisting kilometers beneath the surface long before anything resembling an animal ever existed on land. By 1992, The project was finished, though not by choice. The heat had won. At 180 degrees Celsius, drill bits simply could not survive, and going deeper was judged physically impossible with existing technology, especially after the Soviet Union collapsed and took the funding with it. The site was slowly abandoned, and that's when the legend took over. In 1997, a chain email began circulating, claiming microphones lowered into the hole had picked up the tortured screams of souls in hell, and that panicked engineers sealed the shaft shut. It spread through tabloids and religious broadcasts worldwide, presented as proven fact. It was entirely fabricated, traced back to an exaggerated newspaper story mixed with a horror movie soundtrack. There is no hell recording, but the real abandoned station, rusted and covered in graffiti, needed no embellishment to be unsettling. So has anyone beaten this record since? No, and that's the strange part. Oil and gas wells have gone deeper on paper, but only by drilling sideways for miles, like Qatar's Al Shaheen well, stretching over 12,000 meters mostly horizontal, not straight down through undisturbed crust. Vertically, into solid continental rock, nothing has ever surpassed the Kola borehole's 1989 depth. The hole itself is almost comically small for something so famous. Despite reaching over 7 miles of drilled pipe, its diameter is just 23 centimeters, about 9 inches wide, barely large enough to fit a dinner plate through. Today the rig is gone. The windows of the station are smashed, and the shaft sits sealed beneath a rusted, welded metal cap in the Russian tundra, a monument to a race almost nobody outside the old Soviet Union remembers happening. Here's the real twist. All of that, 24 years of drilling, billions of rubles, cracked drill bits, boiling rock, and history's deepest hole, only got humanity 0.2% of the way to the center of our own planet. We have mapped the surface of Mars in higher resolution than we have mapped the ground beneath our own feet. Everything we know about Earth's core, its mantle, its molten heart, comes not from digging, but from listening, from the echo of earthquakes bouncing through rock we will never physically touch. We have walked on the moon 384,000 kilometers away, yet no human tool has ever punched more than 12 kilometers into the world we actually stand on. Somewhere beneath your feet right now sits 6,371 kilometers of mostly unexplored planet, closer than any star and stranger than most of outer space. Subscribe for more stories like this.